There is a subtle tragedy hidden in the way we think. It's the tragedy of interpretation, the human tendency to mistake opinion for truth, reaction for revelation, and emotion for understanding. From the moment we open our eyes, we are trained to label, judge, and explain everything we see. We think this makes us intelligent, but in reality, it blinds us to life as it is. Interpretation is the ego's favorite disguise. It pretends to seek truth, yet its real purpose is to maintain control. Every time you interpret reality through your conditioning, through fear, desire, or belief, you create a private world inside your head, and then you live inside that world instead of in the living presence of what actually is. That is how humanity fell asleep, not through sin, but through commentary. The world you experience is not reality, it is your reaction to it. What you call understanding is usually just projection. You don't see things as they are, you see them as you are, shaped by memory, distorted by emotion, and filtered through desire. That is why the sages and saints warned that the mind must become still before it can see truth. Because as long as you are interpreting, you are inventing. Look at how often we judge others, how quickly we build stories about their motives and meanings. You meet someone's eyes, and within seconds, the mind begins to whisper, "They're arrogant, they're kind, they're dangerous, they're mine." The labels flood in before the moment has even unfolded. You haven't met the person, you've met your projection of them. That is interpretation, the substitution of reality with imagination. Roy Masters used to say, interpretation is not good. He meant that the instant you interpret, you stop observing. You step away from awareness and into identity. You no longer see what is happening. You see what you want or fear to be happening, and in that gap between seeing and believing, illusion is born. The serpent of thought whispers meaning where none exists, and the soul mistakes the whisper for wisdom. The ego thrives on this illusion because it needs confusion to survive. It loves explaining. It builds entire religions, ideologies, and philosophies out of interpretation. But every interpretation, even the noble ones, divides the world. To interpret is to separate. To observe is to unite. Interpretation says, I know. Awareness says, I see. The first closes the door. The second opens it. True seeing requires stillness, a silence of mind so complete that truth can reveal itself without interference. That's why spiritual masters across all traditions point to the same gate, the end of opinion. You cannot find God while explaining Him. You cannot love while labeling. You cannot hear the divine whisper while rehearsing your reply. Only when you stop interpreting do you begin to experience what is truly happening. And what is truly happening is always simple. The mind complicates life through its commentary, but reality itself is immediate. A sound, a breath, a movement, a feeling. These are not problems until thought begins to judge them. Pain becomes suffering only when interpreted as injustice. Silence becomes loneliness only when interpreted as absence. Even joy becomes fleeting when interpreted as something to keep. The world is not tormenting you. Your interpretation is. Masters would often tell his students, stop interpreting, wait and see. Those 3 words contain the essence of spiritual practice. When you wait, you are not reacting, you are allowing. When you see, you are not thinking, you are receiving. Wait and see means surrendering control of meaning. It means trusting that truth can stand on its own without your commentary. That surrender is what the ego fears most, because it knows that if you stop explaining, it ceases to exist. Interpretation is the ego's breath. Awareness is its death. The moment you observe without opinion, you take the first step toward awakening. That's why most people never truly awaken. They keep the commentary running even in meditation. They turn silence into another performance, reflection into analysis, surrender into strategy. But real awareness is wordless. It has no motive, no agenda, no defense. It simply sees. When you live this way, life begins to unfold differently. You start noticing details that were always there, but hidden beneath noise. The rhythm of breath, the subtle intelligence of movement, the beauty of impermanence. Every ordinary moment begins to glow with significance, not because you assign meaning to it, but because meaning reveals itself. That is divine intelligence at work, spontaneous understanding, untainted by interpretation. But this awareness cannot coexist with resentment, because resentment is interpretation's twin. To resent is to reinterpret the past endlessly. The ego feeds on replays of injustice. It tells stories about who was right and who was wrong, who should have loved you and who failed you. The more you replay, the stronger the illusion becomes, and you don't notice that you're reliving pain not because it still exists, but because you keep explaining it. That is why forgiveness has nothing to do with condoning and everything to do with ending interpretation. Forgiveness means seeing the past without commentary. It means realizing that the people who hurt you were hypnotized by their own interpretations, victims of the same blindness you once shared. The moment you see that clearly, compassion arises naturally, and the chain of reaction breaks. Forgiveness is not a moral duty. It is a perceptual correction. Interpretation makes you feel powerful, but it actually weakens you. Every opinion drains energy. Every judgment separates you from the source. The mind that constantly interprets is like a noisy radio drowning out the signal of divine awareness. When you finally turn down the volume, you hear the original broadcast again, the quiet hum of being itself. That hum is God's voice, always present, never distorted, waiting beneath your explanations. You cannot interpret your way to heaven. Heaven is not a conclusion, it is a perception. It appears when the mind stops interfering with creation. That is why Jesus said, "Unless you become as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom." A child doesn't interpret, it experiences. It sees without naming, listens without judging, and loves without strategy. To return to that innocence is to return to God's direct perception. The modern world worships analysis, so this teaching sounds like madness. We are told that interpretation is intelligence, that commentary is wisdom. But what we call intellect is often just overthinking, dressed in sophisticated language. The greatest minds in history were not interpreters, they were observers. They saw what was always there, the hidden patterns of order behind the chaos of explanation. The mystic, the scientist, and the poet all meet at this point, the moment when seeing replaces speaking. If you want to find peace, stop trying to understand everything. You will never interpret your way out of fear. Fear dissolves only in direct observation. Look at it without comment, and it begins to unravel on its own. The same goes for anger, jealousy, sorrow. They exist only through interpretation. They depend on stories to survive. The moment you stop feeding them with narrative, they fade like smoke in sunlight. Awareness is the sun, interpretation is the shadow. Once you begin to see how interpretation works, you start to recognize it everywhere. You notice it in conversation, in news, in art, even in prayer. People rarely relate to reality. They relate to their thoughts about it. A man doesn't speak to his wife. He speaks to his interpretation of her. A woman doesn't pray to God. She prays to her idea of him. The entire world is a hall of mirrors reflecting imagination, and yet everyone insists the reflections are real. That is why humanity suffers. We live in a house of self-made meanings and call it truth. We mistake reaction for revelation. But interpretation, no matter how sincere, always introduces distortion. It replaces direct knowing with second-hand belief. You could say that interpretation is the first sin, the moment we chose the voice in our head over the voice of God. If you trace all suffering back to its origin, you will find interpretation at its root. Pain becomes suffering when the mind adds a story to it. This shouldn't be happening. I don't deserve this. They shouldn't have done that. That commentary is the true source of torment. Without it, pain is just sensation, intense but innocent. The moment you stop explaining it, pain loses its poison. It transforms from punishment into purification. That is what Christ meant by taking up your cross. It is not about glorifying suffering. It is about ceasing to interpret it. You allow what is without judgment or resistance. You stop assigning meaning to pain and simply witness it. That act of witnessing burns away the ego that feeds on explanation. The self that says, "Why me?" dies in the fire of awareness, and in its place arises a silence so vast it contains God. Roy Masters once said, "When you interpret, you play God." And he was right, because to interpret is to claim authority over meaning, to tell reality what it should be instead of listening to what it is. The ego cannot stand the idea of not knowing. It wants to be the narrator, the judge, the god of its little universe. But every time it narrates, it separates itself from life. The kingdom of heaven cannot enter a divided mind. So the path back to truth is the undoing of interpretation. You don't have to fight it, you only have to notice it. Watch how quickly the mind reacts to everything, how it comments on sound, on people, on memory, on silence itself. It's like a child playing with fire, unable to stop touching. But once you observe this process without judging it, something miraculous begins to happen. Awareness steps out of the commentary and watches it burn out. That moment, when the observer awakens, is the beginning of salvation. You realize that you are not the one interpreting. You are the one watching interpretation occur. You are the sky, not the weather, the light, not the flicker. The mind's chatter continues, but it no longer defines you. You've discovered a dimension of being that is untouched by thought, the silent witness that existed before the mind began speaking. From that stillness, life becomes sacred again. You stop trying to control it, and it starts to reveal itself. You see beauty where there used to be noise, and order where there used to be chaos. People become luminous again, not because they changed, but because you stopped projecting onto them. The world you once feared turns out to be innocent. You were fighting ghosts all along. This is what forgiveness really means. The restoration of vision. When you stop interpreting, you start seeing. And when you see, you realize there was never anything to forgive. Everyone was already doing the best they could with the consciousness they had. Every conflict was just two people defending their interpretations. When the veil lifts, compassion replaces condemnation. The mind becomes quiet, and love starts to move through you without effort. In that quiet, you begin to hear the divine intelligence that has always guided existence. It doesn't speak in words, it speaks in recognition. Suddenly, you know things without thinking. You sense right action before deciding. You are moved, not by analysis, but by resonance. Life starts to feel choreographed, not by fate, but by alignment. You no longer interpret events, you participate in them. You become one with the unfolding, and this is what the world calls grace, the effortless rhythm of life when awareness replaces interpretation. Grace is not a reward, it's a natural state. It's what happens when resistance ends. The ego believes that grace must be earned, but awareness knows it was never lost. It was only hidden behind layers of commentary. When those layers dissolve, the soul breathes again. Every breath becomes a prayer, every moment an altar. The ego resists this silence because it feels like death. And in a way, it is. The death of the interpreter is the death of the false self. But what remains after the death of ego is not emptiness, it's clarity. A new kind of intelligence arises, one that doesn't need to think to know. It perceives directly. It lives without defense. It is the mind of Christ, not a religious ideal, but a state of awareness beyond opinion. That is the true meaning of, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." It's not about adopting a theology, it's about surrendering interpretation. Christ's consciousness was pure observation, complete trust in the Father's will, unclouded by personal meaning. When he said, "Not my will, but thine," he was releasing the final interpretation, the last illusion of control. And in that surrender, he became the bridge between humanity and God. You can live that same surrender right now. You don't need to reach enlightenment or master philosophy. You simply need to stop explaining life to yourself. Let the next moment arrive undefended. See what happens when you resist the urge to define it. At first, it will feel uncomfortable, like stepping into space without ground. But very quickly, the light begins to hold you. You realize the ground was never beneath you, it was within you all along. The mind fears silence because it equates it with annihilation. But silence is not annihilation, it is completion. In silence, you find the thing interpretation has always been trying to imitate: understanding. Understanding is not built, it's revealed. It doesn't come from adding more thoughts, but from removing them. When you stop interpreting, understanding blossoms naturally, like a flower unfolding in sunlight. That is why Master said, "Stop thinking, and you will know." So stop explaining your pain. Stop defining your purpose. Stop deciding who you are. You don't need to interpret the meaning of life. You need to see it. Life is meaning itself, continuously expressing through everything that is. When you stop explaining, you begin to experience that meaning directly. And in that direct experience, the distance between you and God disappears. The two were never separate, only interpreted as such. When the mind finally grows quiet, you begin to realize how much energy was wasted on interpretation. Every emotion, every argument, every worry was powered by an inner narrator that could not stop speaking. The voice that insists on knowing, labeling, fixing, or improving is the same voice that keeps you from peace. You were never at war with the world. You were at war with your own commentary about it. That commentary runs so deep that most people can't imagine living without it. The idea of a silent mind feels frightening, as if without interpretation, existence would lose meaning. But that fear is the interpreter defending its job. In truth, when interpretation ends, meaning becomes infinite. It no longer needs to be explained because it is directly felt. You realize that the only thing that ever made life seem meaningless was the mind's insistence on defining it. When you stop interpreting, the world does not disappear. It becomes luminous. Every detail, every sound, every movement begins to radiate presence. You feel connected to everything because the barrier of judgment is gone. The tree outside your window, the face of a stranger, the rhythm of rain, everything pulses with the same intelligence. You understand, not intellectually but experientially, that life itself is aware. This awareness has no opinions. It doesn't prefer one moment over another. It simply witnesses. And in that witnessing, all opposites dissolve. There is no good or bad, success or failure, right or wrong. There is only what is, and it is enough. The moment you rest in that simplicity, the burden of life falls away. You don't need to fix reality anymore. You only need to see it clearly. Truth takes care of itself. Roy Masters used to say that interpretation is the enemy of patience, because the instant you interpret, you decide what should be happening instead of letting what is happen. You try to control the flow of life instead of trusting its direction. But patience is the art of non-interpretation. It is the ability to remain still while the divine intelligence arranges everything perfectly. When you stop rushing to explain, you discover that God has been speaking all along, just not in words. It's hard for the ego to accept this because it has built its identity on being the interpreter. Without opinions, it doesn't know who it is. The ego says, if I don't interpret, I'll disappear. And awareness quietly answers, exactly. The ego fears this dissolution, but the soul celebrates it. For when the interpreter dies, the observer is born, and the observer is eternal. The observer is not a person, it's a state of consciousness. It has no name, no age, no story. It sees, it feels, it knows, without commentary. When you live as the observer, life flows through you with an effortless grace. You no longer struggle to make sense of things. You simply respond to each moment with the intelligence inherent in it. That is what Jesus called the peace that passes understanding. It passes understanding because it exists before understanding, before words, before thought, before interpretation. And in that peace, something astonishing happens. Problems begin to resolve themselves without effort. You'll notice that the more silent you become, the more life begins to arrange itself. Relationships heal, timing aligns, synchronicities appear. It's not that you've gained control, it's that you've stopped interfering. The divine order that was always present starts to unfold naturally because you're no longer blocking it with your explanations. This is why masters taught that awareness is the real prayer. Most people pray with words, asking God to fix what their interpretations have broken. But awareness prays by listening. It doesn't tell God what to do, it allows God to do it. Awareness is trust in action, not the belief that everything will go your way, but the understanding that there is no your way. There is only the way. And when you live this way, suffering becomes sacred. You begin to see pain not as punishment, but as purification, the fire that burns away false meaning. Every challenge exposes another layer of interpretation for you to surrender. Each difficulty reveals a story the ego has been telling. When you face pain without commentary, you allow the false self to dissolve in the light of truth. That is how resurrection happens, one surrendered interpretation at a time. The moment you stop interpreting your suffering, you discover its secret gift. Awareness expands. You start to see how every hardship was a teacher in disguise. Every wound, an invitation to deeper clarity. Life is not happening against you. It's happening for your awakening. Even the darkest moments contain divine intelligence if you stop explaining them long enough to feel it. Silence reveals what suffering conceals. This is why the saints could endure unimaginable pain with peace. They weren't superhuman. They were free from interpretation. They no longer labeled pain as evil or loss as tragedy. They saw everything as a movement of divine intelligence. And because they didn't resist it, the experience purified them completely. The fire that destroys illusion reveals gold. That gold is awareness, unburnable, untouchable, eternal. You will know you are awakening when your need to interpret begins to fade. You'll find yourself less interested in arguing, defending, or convincing. The mind will still try to comment, but you won't give it your energy. You'll listen to life directly, without translation. And as that listening deepens, the separation between observer and observed begins to disappear. You realize that what you are looking at is yourself, consciousness seeing its own reflection. When the seer and the seen merge, interpretation becomes impossible. Because interpretation requires two, the subject and the object, the thinker and the thought. But awareness is one. It contains both without division. That unity is enlightenment, not as a mystical achievement, but as the natural state of being. It's what you were before the mind started explaining reality to itself. The ancient masters called this state seeing with the single eye. Jesus said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." That single eye is pure awareness, perception without commentary. It sees truth without distortion, love without condition, and life without meaning imposed upon it. To live this way is to return to Eden, the world before the serpent of interpretation spoke its first lie. When interpretation falls away, even the body begins to change. You can feel it, a deep cellular relaxation. The tension you've carried for years, the tightness behind every anxious thought begins to release. Because interpretation keeps the nervous system in constant conflict. Every opinion, every judgment, every story triggers fight or flight. When you stop explaining, you stop resisting, and the body finally receives permission to rest. Roy Masters used to say, "There is no peace in reaction." He was pointing to this simple truth. Interpretation is reaction disguised as reasoning. You interpret because you're trying to feel safe. You analyze because you're afraid to let life be. The ego believes that if it can define something, it can control it. But control is the opposite of peace. The moment you interpret, you move from observation to obsession, from presence to pretense. Watch closely the next time you feel tension or fear. Notice how quickly the mind begins to interpret. This means something's wrong. This means I failed. This means I'm in danger. But if you simply observe without believing, the emotion dissolves. Awareness drains the poison from the body. The reaction fades into stillness, and in that stillness, peace returns. You didn't fix anything, you stopped feeding it meaning. The body and the soul are always trying to heal themselves, but interpretation interrupts the process. The divine intelligence that designed your being knows how to restore balance. You only need to stop interfering. Silence is the highest medicine because it allows that intelligence to operate freely. The less you explain, the faster healing occurs. This is not mysticism, it's mechanics, the physics of spirit, and when you start to live this way, your relationships change dramatically. You stop trying to interpret people, their words, their motives, their moods. You begin to see them as they are, not as your mind defines them. This creates a space of compassion so wide that others feel safe in your presence. They sense they are no longer being measured, and something in them begins to relax. Communication becomes clear because it's no longer polluted by projection. True listening is the absence of interpretation. When you truly listen, you don't prepare your reply. You don't analyze what's being said. You simply receive. And in that pure receiving, something beautiful happens. Understanding arises by itself. You find that truth doesn't need defense, and love doesn't need translation. People begin to open up to you not because you understand them, but because you've stopped trying to. This is how healing spreads, not through advice, but through awareness. Awareness is contagious. The stillness in you awakens the stillness in others. Without words, without method, without intention, your presence becomes medicine. You radiate clarity the way a flame radiates light. Those around you may not know what changed, but they feel lighter, their minds quiet, their hearts open. That is divine communication, soul to soul, without interpretation. The ego cannot love this way because it loves conditionally. It interprets love as transaction. If you make me feel good, I will love you. But true love has no interpretation. It doesn't require understanding. It is understanding. It sees beyond behavior into being. It recognizes that behind every mask of anger or fear is the same consciousness longing to wake up. Love looks past the story and sees the soul. That vision is what Christ embodied, the refusal to interpret even betrayal. On the cross, he didn't curse or accuse. He said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." That is the voice of pure awareness, untouched by interpretation. He saw humanity's blindness and responded with compassion, not commentary. That is why his consciousness is eternal. Awareness cannot be crucified. When you live from that consciousness, your daily life becomes sacred. Washing dishes, walking down the street, sitting in silence, everything becomes holy because everything is seen. You no longer need grand experiences to feel spiritual. Awareness sanctifies the ordinary. You realize that heaven was never somewhere else. It was the world seen without distortion. The miracle is not walking on water. It's walking on earth without interpretation. In this state, time itself begins to change. The constant urgency that drives humanity fades. You no longer chase the next moment because this one is complete. You stop running from your past or rushing toward your future. The mind, freed from interpretation, relaxes into now, and in the now, eternity unfolds. You realize that eternity is not infinite time. It's timelessness, the absence of commentary on time. This shift cannot be forced. It comes quietly like dawn. You don't achieve awareness, you stop obstructing it. The more you try to interpret awareness, the more it hides. It reveals itself only to the humble, to those willing to admit that they don't know, that humility is not weakness, it's openness. The universe flows through the mind that no longer insists on being right. And in that humility, something remarkable happens. The sense of me begins to dissolve. You stop feeling like a separate observer of life and start realizing that you are life observing itself. The boundaries between self and other grow thin. You look at a tree and feel the same stillness within you reflected in its form. You hear the wind and sense that the breath moving through the leaves is the same breath moving through your chest. All is one movement, one awareness. This is what the mystics meant by unity consciousness. It's not a vision, it's a perception, purified of interpretation. You no longer live as a fragment of creation, you live as the awareness of creation itself. The world stops being a story and becomes an event, a continuous unfolding of divine presence. You are both the witness and the witnessed, the silence and the sound, the eternal observer and the temporary form. When you live without interpretation, you no longer experience life as happening to you. It happens through you. The difference is everything. Instead of reacting to events, you allow them to unfold through awareness. The same energy that once fueled anxiety now fuels understanding. You don't suppress emotion, you see it. You don't resist thought, you observe it. And in that observation, both emotion and thought lose their control. This is what Roy Masters meant when he said that understanding is salvation. It's not understanding through intellect, but through pure awareness, direct recognition unfiltered by opinion. The moment you see something clearly, without emotional interference, it changes. Darkness cannot survive the gaze of awareness. When you see anger without interpreting it as good or bad, it reveals its roots: fear, helplessness, unmet love. Once seen, it dissolves. And so, awareness becomes the new law. You no longer live by reaction or interpretation, but by recognition. This law doesn't need commandments because it cannot violate itself. When you see clearly, you naturally act in harmony. You don't need to control behavior, you understand it. Understanding ends the need for rules, because the soul that sees cannot harm. That is divine order restored. Heaven reappearing within human awareness. Look at nature. It interprets nothing. The tree doesn't wonder if it's growing correctly. The river doesn't explain its path. The sun doesn't justify its light. Everything simply is. That same intelligence flows through you, but interpretation blocks it. The mind tries to improve upon God's design by labeling, comparing, judging. The result is chaos, the disorder of a creature that no longer trusts its source. Awareness restores that trust. It returns you to the flow of divine movement. When you return to that flow, effort dissolves. Life stops being a battle and becomes a dance. Decisions happen without struggle because you're no longer the one making them. The same intelligence that spins galaxies moves your hand, your breath, your words. You can feel it, a soft guidance beneath thought, a quiet intuition that never argues. When you follow it, life aligns effortlessly. When you ignore it, tension returns. Awareness teaches through contrast. You start to realize that awareness has always been the teacher, the guide, the savior. Jesus was not introducing something new. He was revealing what was hidden, that divine awareness is our natural state. The kingdom of God is within you was not poetry, it was instruction. The mind that stops interpreting discovers that kingdom instantly. It was never far away. It was always waiting behind the noise. Interpretation makes spirituality complicated. Awareness makes it obvious. You don't need years of study to awaken. You need one moment of stillness. You don't need to understand the scriptures. You need to stop interpreting them. The truth they point to can be seen right now, not tomorrow, not after purification, but now. That's the true miracle of consciousness. It needs no preparation, only permission. When you live this way, you become unshakable. The world may shout its endless interpretations, politics, religion, emotion, confusion, but none of it enters your core. You stand like a mountain in the middle of a storm. The noise swirls around, but you remain unmoved. This doesn't mean you are detached. It means you are anchored. Stillness is not withdrawal. It is mastery. And from that mastery arises true humility, because the more you see, the less you claim to know. You realize that all knowledge is provisional, all theories temporary. You bow before the mystery that sustains everything. That bowing is worship, not of an idea, but of reality itself. You begin to live in reverence, aware that every breath is a gift, every moment a teacher, every face a reflection of the same infinite presence. You also begin to notice something astonishing. Creation starts to respond to you, not to your ego, but to your awareness. The universe mirrors the quality of your perception. When you see clearly, life aligns clearly. When you see with confusion, life reflects confusion. It's not punishment or reward, it's resonance. Awareness organizes reality because awareness is reality. The clearer the observer, the purer the reflection. This is the hidden science of miracles. They are not interruptions of natural law. They are the natural law revealed. The miracle happens when perception becomes so clear that it overrides illusion. Jesus could calm the storm not because he controlled nature, but because he was nature. Consciousness aligned with itself. When awareness and matter are in perfect harmony, conflict disappears. That is divine coherence, the peace be still of creation. But this clarity can only emerge through surrender. You cannot reach awareness by effort. Effort is interpretation disguised as progress. The mind says, I must try to be aware, but awareness is what's already watching the one who tries. The seeker and the sought are the same. Every attempt to grasp awareness pushes it away, because awareness cannot be grasped. It can only be realized. And realization is always simple. It arrives not in thunder, but in quiet recognition. You look at life and say, oh, just that. No conclusion, no commentary, no story. That oh is enlightenment in miniature. The moment you stop pretending to know and start allowing truth to reveal itself. The heart relaxes, the breath deepens, and suddenly everything makes sense without explanation. This is not knowledge, it's knowing. It doesn't come from thought, it comes from being. You will know you are living in awareness when gratitude arises for no reason, not because of good fortune or comfort, but because existence itself feels sacred. You wake up and feel blessed simply to see, to breathe, to be. The mind, once obsessed with meaning, now bows in awe of meaninglessness, not as nihilism, but as perfection. You realize that life doesn't need purpose to be holy. Its holiness is self-evident. This realization cannot be put into words, though we try. The mystics, the poets, the prophets, they all tried to describe it, and every description fell short. That's why the wise speak less. They know that truth loses power when interpreted. Silence becomes their language, presence their message. The more awake you become, the fewer words you need. People will feel your awareness long before they hear your explanations. When silence becomes your language, life starts speaking back in ways you never noticed before. The movement of wind through leaves feels like a conversation. The rhythm of footsteps, the glimmer of light on water, even the pause between heartbeats. Everything begins to echo the same message. Be still and know the universe was never silent. Your mind was simply too loud to hear it. And now, as the mind grows quiet, you begin to sense the intelligence behind all things. You see that nothing has ever been random. Every challenge, every joy, every encounter was part of a perfect orchestration designed to bring you here, to this moment of seeing without interpretation. The world hasn't changed, your perception has, and in that new perception, everything shines. You look back at your life and smile, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Every pain was a teacher, every loss a purification. Even the darkest nights were sculpting your awareness into transparency. You realized that you were never abandoned, never punished, never forgotten. You were being refined, freed from interpretation so that truth could finally reveal itself. You were being prepared to see. This realization brings a kind of joy that doesn't depend on anything. It's not the high of pleasure or the relief of success. It's a deep, steady radiance, the peace that comes from knowing that nothing can truly be lost. Because everything you ever loved, everything you ever were, still exists in awareness. The body may age, the mind may forget, but awareness remains untouched, the eternal witness of all change. You begin to see that awareness itself is love, not sentimental love, not emotional attachment, but the silent recognition that everything belongs. Nothing is outside the light of being. Even what we call evil is only awareness asleep, still caught in the nightmare of interpretation. The moment it wakes, it too returns to the light. That is why judgment ends when awareness begins. You no longer divide creation into good and bad. You see the one consciousness wearing every mask. Roy Masters often said, when you stop interpreting, God fights your battles for you. It sounds poetic, but it's profoundly literal. The energy you once spent resisting, defending, and explaining is now available for truth to use. Life begins to rearrange itself without your interference. Conflicts resolve, fear dissolves, order emerges. You realize that divine will was never separate from your own, only misinterpreted. And so you stop striving to be spiritual. You stop performing awareness. You simply live it. You move through the world with quiet clarity, responding instead of reacting, observing instead of analyzing. The smallest actions, a glance, a touch, a breath, carry depth. You don't have to convince anyone of truth, because truth radiates from you. Others feel it not as doctrine, but as peace. This peace cannot be taught. It can only be remembered. It is the original state, the one you knew before language, before judgment, before interpretation. As a child, you looked at the sky and didn't ask what it meant. You simply gazed, and that gaze was prayer. To live without interpretation is to return to that gaze, to the wonder that sees God everywhere, because it has stopped trying to define Him. And so life becomes beautifully simple. You no longer need to explain who you are. You no longer need to justify what happens. You no longer need to find meaning in pain or pleasure. You rest in being, and being reveals everything. This is not escape from the world. It is the world redeemed. The dream of separation ends, and the great reconciliation begins. Mind and heart, spirit and flesh, heaven and earth reunited in awareness. This is what Jesus meant when He said, "The kingdom of heaven is at hand." It was never somewhere else, waiting in time. It was always here, hidden behind interpretation. The moment you stop naming, it appears. The tree becomes sacred. The silence hums with intelligence. Every breath becomes communion. You don't reach heaven, you remember it. Heaven is perception restored. And when perception is restored, death itself loses meaning. Because what could die when everything is awareness? The body changes, the story ends, but the seeing continues. You realize that death was only another interpretation, a misunderstanding of transformation. Life never ends. It shifts perspective. The observer moves from form to formlessness, from experience to essence. Awareness remains eternal, expanding, infinite. So the journey ends where it began, in the stillness before interpretation. You started as awareness, you got lost in thought, and now you return as wisdom. The circle completes itself. The serpent of knowledge finally releases its tail and becomes the symbol of eternity, wholeness restored. You are no longer trapped in meaning. You are meaning itself. You are no longer chasing truth. You are truth seen clearly. And from this place of clarity, you understand that the greatest prayer is not spoken but lived. To walk without interpretation, to see without judgment, to love without condition, to be without explanation. That is the end of suffering. That is the beginning of freedom. And that quietly, humbly, eternally is the mind of God awake in man.